There's a number that used to mean something in this country. $100,000. For decades, that was the threshold. The marker of success, the salary that meant you'd made it, that you could stop worrying about money, that the American dream had finally opened its doors and let you inside. Your parents talked about it in hushed tones. Financial advisors built their projections around it. Career counselors pointed at it like a finish line. Get to 6 figures, they said, and everything else falls into place. So you did the work. You put in the years. You climbed the ladder, switched companies, negotiated raises, sacrificed weekends and evenings and relationships, and then one day, you looked at your paycheck and saw it. 6 figures. $100,000 a year. You waited for the feeling to arrive. The security, the breathing room, the sense that you could finally relax and enjoy what you'd built. But the feeling never came. Instead, you found yourself doing the same mental math you did when you made $60,000, checking your account before grocery shopping, hesitating before filling up the gas tank, wondering whether this month would be the one where everything finally felt comfortable, and watching that hope evaporate somewhere between the mortgage payment and the utility bills. You make $100,000 a year, and somehow, impossibly, inexplicably, you still feel broke. You're not imagining it. You're not bad with money. You're not secretly living beyond your means or hiding some extravagant lifestyle that explains the gap between what you earn and what you feel. Something fundamental has shifted in the American economy, and that shift has made a salary that used to guarantee comfort into something that barely covers the basics. Understanding how this happened and why nobody in power wants to talk about it clearly is the first step toward making sense of a financial reality that seems designed to make you feel crazy. Let me tell you about Kevin. He's 38 years old, works as a project manager for a tech company in Austin, and makes exactly $104,000 a year. On paper, Kevin should be thriving. He's in a growing city, in a growing industry, earning more than roughly 85% of American households. His parents, who both worked blue-collar jobs their entire lives, still can't quite believe what their son gets paid. When he told them his salary, his mother cried. She thought he'd never have to worry about anything ever again. But here's what Kevin's paycheck actually looks like after taxes. Federal income tax takes about $18,000. State taxes take another $4,000. In Texas? Wait, Texas has no state income tax. So Kevin catches a break there that workers in California or New York don't get. Social Security and Medicare take another $8,000. Health insurance premiums through his employer cost him $6,000 a year, and that's with the company covering 70%. His 401k contribution, which everyone says he needs to maximize, takes another $6,000. By the time the money actually hits his bank account, Kevin's $104,000 salary has become roughly $66,000 in take-home pay, $5,500 a month to cover everything else. That might still sound like plenty. Let's see where it goes. Kevin's rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent part of Austin runs $2,300 a month. He'd love to buy a house, but we've already covered why that door is essentially closed. His car payment is $480, which isn't crazy for a reliable vehicle that he needs for work. Car insurance adds another $160. Utilities, including electricity that seems to climb every summer, run about $2. Internet and phone together costs $170. Groceries for one person. And Kevin isn't buying anything fancy, average around $500 a month. Gas for the car runs about $200. Add it up. Housing, transportation, utilities, communication, food, fuel, the absolute basics of existing in modern America. Kevin is spending $4,030 a month before he does anything optional. Before entertainment. Before dating. Before clothes or household items, or the occasional dinner with friends. Before saving anything beyond the retirement account he already contributes to, he has $1,470 left over each month. That's his margin. That's the cushion between a 6-figure salary and the edge. Now let's talk about what that margin actually looks like in practice. Kevin's car needed new brakes last month. That was $800. His apartment complex raised the rent by $150 starting next quarter because, of course they did. His dental insurance doesn't cover the crown he needs, so that's another $600 out of pocket. He wanted to fly home for his nephew's birthday, but flights cost $400 and he couldn't justify it. He's 38 years old, makes over $100,000 a year, and he couldn't afford a plane ticket to see his family. Kevin isn't living lavishly. He doesn't have a boat or a vacation home or a closet full of designer clothes. He drives a Honda. He cooks at home most nights. He hasn't taken a real vacation in 2 years. He's doing everything that financial advice columns tell him to do, and he is still one unexpected expense away from dipping into savings that are growing fast enough to matter. When he tells people he feels broke, they look at him like he's complaining about a problem they'd love to have. But the numbers don't lie. $100,000 isn't what it used to be. And Kevin's situation isn't unusual. It's not an edge case in an expensive city. It's not someone making poor choices with good money. It's the new normal for six-figure earners across America. And it is especially brutal for anyone in their 30s or 40s who grew up being told that this salary would solve all their problems. The goalposts moved while they were running the race, and nobody updated the map. This isn't about feeling sorry for people who make good money. Plenty of Americans would love to have Kevin's problems, but that's exactly the point. If someone earning $100,000 a year still feels the squeeze, still worries about money, still can't afford the life that previous generations built on half that salary, then something has gone deeply wrong with the entire system. And if we can't talk honestly about what that something is, we'll keep giving advice that doesn't match reality to people who are already doing everything right. To understand why $100,000 doesn't work anymore, we need to look at what that number used to mean, not in some abstract economic sense, but in the lived reality of what it could actually buy. Because the disconnect between past and present is where the frustration lives. It's where the feeling of being cheated comes from. And it's where the math reveals something that everyone senses but nobody wants to say out loud. In 1990, the median home price in America was around $80,000. A household making $100,000 could buy that home with a comfortable margin. The mortgage payment would consume maybe 20% of gross income. There was room left over for saving, for vacations, for building the kind of life that a six-figure salary was supposed to provide. Homeownership wasn't a stretch goal. It was an obvious next step. Today, the median home price sits around $420,000. That's more than a five-fold increase. But here's what didn't increase fivefold. Salaries. That $100,000 income in 1990 would need to be worth roughly $250,000 today just to maintain the same purchasing power for housing alone. Someone making $100,000 now has less than half the housing buying power that the same salary provided 34 years ago. Not slightly less, not a little squeezed less. And housing is just the beginning. Let's talk about healthcare, because that's where a six-figure income really starts to bleed. In 1990, the average annual premium for employer-sponsored family health coverage was around $3,000. Today, that number exceeds $24,000, with employees typically covering about $6,000 to $8,000 of that directly. And that's before deductibles, co-pays, and the maze of costs that insurance doesn't cover. A single emergency room visit can erase a month's savings. A serious illness can trigger bankruptcy even for people with good insurance and good salaries. Jennifer knows this firsthand. She's 42, works as a marketing director in Minneapolis, and makes $112,000 a year. Last year, her daughter needed an emergency routine surgery. No complications. 2 nights in the hospital. The bill came to $47,000. Insurance covered most of it, but Jennifer's portion was still $11,000 after the deductible and $11,000 for something that couldn't be delayed or negotiated or avoided. She put it on a payment plan because she didn't have that kind of money sitting in her account. She makes 6 figures, and she's paying off medical debt like someone living paycheck to paycheck. This is what nobody tells you about earning good money in modern America. The costs that can't be controlled, the expenses that arrive without warning, the bills that ignore your salary and your budget and your careful planning. You can do everything right and still get knocked backward by a system designed to extract maximum payment for minimum service. Jennifer didn't choose to have her daughter's appendix rupture. She didn't overspend on surgery. She just existed in an economy where healthcare costs bear no relationship to what people can actually afford. Let's keep going with the comparison, because the picture only gets darker. In 1990, the average new car cost around $15,000. Today, The average new car costs over $48,000. That's more than triple the price, while incomes have roughly doubled at best. And unlike housing, you can't really avoid car ownership in most of America. Public transportation barely exists outside a handful of cities. Employers expect you to show up reliably. The car payment that used to be optional has become mandatory, and it's eating a larger share of income than ever before. Then there's childcare, the silent budget killer that nobody warns young parents about. In 1990, the average cost of center-based childcare was around $3,000 per year. Today, the average exceeds $11,000 nationally, and in expensive metro areas, it can run $25,000 to $30,000 per child per year. That's not private school. That's not a nanny. That's basic daycare so two parents can work. For a family making $100,000 combined, childcare alone might consume a quarter of their take-home pay. Before housing, before food, before anything else. Daniel and Maria learned this the hard way. They live in Northern Virginia, both work full-time, and together they earn about $130,000 a year. When their second child was born, they did the math on childcare and discovered something absurd. After taxes, commuting costs, and daycare for 2 kids, Maria's salary would net them about $400 a month. She was essentially working full-time to earn $400 in extra household income. They made the painful decision to have her leave the workforce until the kids reached school age. A family earning well into 6 figures couldn't afford for both parents to work. This isn't a budgeting problem. It's not about lattes or avocado toast or whatever condescending analogy financial gurus use to blame people for systemic failures. Daniel and Maria don't have expensive hobbies. They don't take lavish vacations. They buy clothes at Target and drive 7-year-old cars. They're living the most financially responsible life they can construct, and they still make a 6-figure household income work the way their parents' $50,000 income worked a generation ago. The numbers tell a story that contradicts everything we've been taught about financial success in America. The story we grew up with said that hard work leads to advancement. That advancement leads to higher salaries, and that higher salaries lead to security. It was linear. It was logical. It made the sacrifices feel worthwhile, because there was a payoff waiting at the end. But the payoff moved. Or more accurately, the payoff stayed in place, while the costs to reach it exploded in every direction. Housing costs quintupled. Healthcare costs went up 800%. Childcare became a second mortgage. Cars tripled in price. Education, which we were told would unlock higher earning potential, now comes with debt that follows graduates for decades. Every major cost category in American life outpaced wage growth by factors of 2, 3, or 5. And salaries didn't keep up because they weren't supposed to keep up. The same decades that saw costs explode also saw a systematic weakening of worker power. Union membership collapsed. Minimum wages stagnated. Productivity gains that used to flow to workers started flowing to shareholders instead. Between 1979 and 2020, productivity in America rose over 60%, while real hourly wages for most workers grew by less than 18%. The value workers created got captured by someone else. And that someone else wasn't sharing. So, when you feel broke, making $100,000, you're not experiencing a personal failure. You're re-experiencing the end result of 40 years of policy choices that shifted wealth upward, while costs shifted downward onto individuals. Every time you wonder why your salary doesn't work, remember that it's not supposed to work. Not for you. It works great for the people collecting your rent, pricing your healthcare, financing your car, and charging interest on your debt. The system functions perfectly, just not for the people living inside it. There's another layer to this story that doesn't show up in the standard cost of living comparisons. It's the layer of hidden expenses that nobody warns you about. The costs that don't fit neatly into budget categories, but drain your account just the same. The financial death by 1,000 cuts that turns a salary that looks good on paper into something that barely covers reality. Let's start with the basics that aren't basic anymore. Internet service used to be optional. Now it's as essential as electricity. You can't work remotely without it. You can't apply for jobs without it. Your kids can't do homework without it. That $70 to $100 a month for something that did unexist as a household expense 30 years ago. Add a streaming service or two because cable costs $200 and you have to have some form of entertainment. Add cloud storage because your phone demands it. Add subscriptions to software you need for work that your employer doesn't provide. The digital infrastructure of modern life runs $200 to $300 monthly before UVA consumed any actual content. Then there's the phone itself. In 1990, your home phone cost maybe $20 a month. Today, a smartphone plan runs $80 to $100 per person, and you need the phone for everything. It's your camera, your map, your wallet, your communication with your employer, your kid's school, your doctor's office. Going without isn't an option. Neither is going cheap, because budget phones break faster and cost more in the long run. You're locked into an ecosystem designed to extract ongoing payments, and opting out means opting out of modern life itself. Now let's talk about what happens when you try to save money by doing things yourself. Cooking at home instead of eating out sounds responsible. Until you price out groceries, a gallon of milk that cost $2 in 2000 now costs $4. A dozen eggs went from $1 to over $3 in many markets, and during the shortage, hit $7 or $8. Ground beef that was $2 a pound runs $5 or $6 now. Cooking for a family of 4 costs $300 to $500 a month, if you're careful, and closer to $700 or $800 if you want anything fresh or healthy. The advice to stop eating out assumes that eating in is still cheap. It isn't. Robert lives this reality every day. He's a civil engineer in Charlotte, making $98,000, and he tracks every dollar because he has to. His spreadsheet shows something that would shock anyone who thinks 6 figures means financial freedom. After taxes, benefits deductions, and his obligatory retirement contribution, Robert brings home about $5,300 a month. His rent takes $2,100. His car costs $800, including payment, insurance, and gas. Utilities and internet run $3. His phone is $110. Groceries for himself and his teenage son average $6. Student loans from his engineering degree still claim $240 a month, 15 years after graduation. Health costs beyond his premium, including prescriptions and the occasional doctor visit, add another $150 on average. Add it up. Robert's fixed monthly expenses total $5,370. He makes $5,300. He's underwater by $70 a month before buying clothes, before going anywhere, before any entertainment, before any emergency, before anything that might be considered living rather than just surviving. An engineer with nearly $100,000 salary runs a monthly deficit on basic existence, and Robert isn't making poor choices. He doesn't have cable. He hasn't taken a vacation in 3 years. His car is 6 years old. His apartment is modest, not luxurious. He shops at discount grocery stores and buys generic brands. He does everything that personal finance advice tells him to do, and the math still doesn't work. The math couldn't work because the expenses that couldn't be avoided exceed the income that couldn't be increased. It's arithmetic, not lifestyle. Numbers, not choices. This brings us to something that personal finance culture refuses to acknowledge. There is a floor below which expenses cannot drop without serious consequences. You can't reduce rent past a certain point without accepting unsafe conditions or impossible commutes. You can't cut food spending without compromising nutrition. You can't skip health insurance in a country where a single hospital visit can cost more than a car. You can't stop paying for the car when there's no bus route to your job. The discretionary spending that budgeting advice loves to target often does unexist for people struggling on good salaries. And then there are the expenses that come from being unable to afford things properly. This is what economists call the poverty premium, and it applies further up the income ladder than anyone admits. When you can't afford a reliable car, you buy a cheaper one that breaks down more often. Those repairs add up to more than the payment on a better vehicle would have cost. When you can't afford quality clothes, you buy cheaper ones that wear out faster, spending more over time. When you can't afford preventive health care, you skip checkups until small problems become expensive emergencies. The inability to spend money wisely becomes a tax on not having enough money. Rachel learned this lesson last year. She works in pharmaceutical sales in Philadelphia, makes $108,000 a year, and thought she was being smart by delaying a dental cleaning. She was trying to save the $100 copay because money was tight after her rent went up. 6 months later, she needed a root canal and crown. Total cost after insurance was $1,800. The $100 she tried to save cost her $1,700 extra. That's not irresponsible behavior. That's what happens when margins are so thin that even small preventive expenses feel like luxuries. The psychological weight of this situation compounds the financial damage. Stress doesn't just feel bad, it costs money. It affects job performance, potentially limiting raises and promotions. It strains relationships that might otherwise provide support. It leads to health problems that generate more expenses. It creates a fog of anxiety that makes long-term planning nearly impossible. How can you think about retirement when you're not sure about next month? How can you invest in your future when the present is consuming everything you earn? There's also the loneliness of struggling on a salary that others perceive as comfortable. When Robert mentions feeling stretched, people assume he's bad with money or has hidden vices or is exaggerating for sympathy. Nobody believes that an engineer can struggle financially. Nobody believes that a marketing director or a project manager or a sales professional might be one car repair away from crisis. The isolation of invisible struggle makes it harder to find support, share strategies, or even admit the reality of your situation. This isolation is not accidental. A culture that frames financial difficulty as personal failure keeps struggling people silent. It prevents them from organizing, from sharing information, from recognizing that their individual problems are actually collective conditions created by systemic forces. If everyone thinks they're the only one who can't make $100,000 work, nobody asks why $100,000 doesn't work anymore. The question never gets asked because the shame keeps it locked inside individual minds instead of exploding into public discourse where it belongs. But the truth is simpler and more damning than personal failure could ever explain. $100,000 feels like poverty because the cost of participating in American society has been systematically inflated while wages have been systematically suppressed. Every category of essential spending increased faster than incomes. Every pathway to reducing costs got blocked by consolidation, monopoly, and policy capture. What feels like personal inadequacy is actually economic design. So, who benefits from this arrangement? Who wins when $100,000 stops working for the people who earn it? The answer reveals something that most financial content won't touch, because touching, it means naming names, and naming names means confronting power. But you can't understand why you feel broke without understanding who profits from your situation. Start with housing. Your rent goes to a landlord. And increasingly, that landlord isn't a person with a name, you know. It's a corporation with shareholders demanding returns. Real estate investment trusts now control massive portfolios of rental properties, and their legal obligation is to maximize value for investors, not to provide affordable housing, not to keep rents stable, not to leave tenants with enough money to build their own futures, to extract maximum profit from the basic human need for shelter. When your rent increases 8% in a year while your salary increases 3%, that difference flows directly into investment returns for people who already have more than enough. Healthcare works the same way. The $11,000 Jennifer paid for her daughter's appendectomy didn't evaporate. It went somewhere. It went to hospital systems that have consolidated into regional monopolies with the power to set whatever prices they want. It went to insurance companies that take their cut for the privilege of standing between you and your doctor. It went to pharmaceutical companies charging 10 times more for drugs in America than they charge in Canada for the same medication. The money you spend on healthcare generates profit margins that would be illegal in most other developed nations. Your financial stress is their quarterly earnings. Even groceries have been captured by consolidation that works against you. For companies control over 80% of beef processing in America, similar concentration exists in pork, poultry, and packaged foods. When a handful of corporations control the supply chain from farm to store shelf, they can coordinate prices in ways that extract maximum value from consumers. The grocery bill that grew 40% in 4 years didn't grow because farmers got rich. Farmer incomes have stayed largely flat. It grew because the corporations in the middle took more at every step, while you had no alternative but to pay. This is what late-stage market concentration looks like from the inside. Every essential category of spending has been captured by entities large enough to set prices and powerful enough to prevent competition. You can't shop around for cheaper electricity when one company holds the regional monopoly. You can't negotiate your internet bill when two providers have carved up territories and agreed not to compete. You can't find affordable insulin when three manufacturers control the entire global supply and coordinate pricing. The market that economic textbooks describe, with competition driving down prices and giving consumers choices, doesn't exist for the things you actually need to survive. And the policy choices that enabled this concentration were not accidents. They were lobbied for, paid for, and delivered by politicians responsive to the entities writing campaign checks. Antitrust enforcement collapsed over the past 4 decades because the companies that would be targeted by enforcement funded the campaigns of officials who control enforcement. Tax policy shifted burden from corporations and the wealthy onto workers, because workers do have lobbyists and the wealthy do. Labor laws that once protected worker organizing were gutted because organized workers demand higher wages, and higher wages cut into profits. What you experience as personal financial struggle is actually the end result of a political project, decades in the making, a project to shift risk from institutions onto individuals, to transfer wealth from workers to owners, to hollow out the middle class while maintaining the appearance of opportunity. You were told that hard work and a good salary would lead to security, and that story was useful for keeping you on the treadmill. But the treadmill was always designed to generate power for someone else, while you ran in place. This is not conspiracy theory, it's observable policy history. The decisions that created your situation are documented in legislative records, regulatory filings, and corporate earnings calls. The people who made those decisions were not hiding. They were celebrating. Every time a regulation was relaxed, an industry consolidated, or a tax cut passed, someone issued a press release taking credit. They just didn't mention that the flip side of their victory was your defeat. So where does this leave you? Where does it leave everyone making a salary that sounds impressive but barely functions? Where does it leave the millions of Americans who followed the rules and found that the rules had been changed while they were unlooking? The honest answer is that there's no individual solution to a systemic problem. You cannot budget your way out of an economy designed to extract more than you earn. You cannot side hustle your way past cost increases that outpace any reasonable income growth. The advice to work harder, save more, and sacrifice further assumes that the math works if you just try hard enough. The math doesn't work. That's the whole point. Making the math not work is how the extraction happens. But understanding this clearly has value, even if it doesn't come with a 10-step action plan. It has value because it frees you from the shame of imaginary failure. You didn't fail. The system is performing exactly as designed, just not in your favor. Knowing that changes how you see yourself and how you see the world. It transforms private anxiety into public understanding. It makes the invisible visible. And visibility is the first step toward change. Not change that happens overnight. Not change that saves you from next month's bills. But change that becomes possible when enough people recognize that their individual struggles share common causes. When a project manager in Austin and a nurse in Denver and an engineer in Charlotte all understand that their financial stress comes from the same sources, they stop blaming themselves and start asking harder questions. Questions about why things are this way. Questions about who decided this was acceptable. Questions about what different choices might create different outcomes. Some people are finding ways to survive within the constraints. Multi-generational households are increasing because pooling resources is the only math that works. Geographic arbitrage, moving to lower-cost areas while keeping higher-paying remote jobs, helps some who have that flexibility. Aggressive career switching, chasing the sectors and companies that still pay wages that match costs, works for those with transferable skills and tolerance for instability. These are not solutions. They are adaptations to a broken system. But adaptation is what humans do when the environment turns hostile. What you should not do is accept the narrative that your struggle reflects your shortcomings. That narrative serves the people who benefit from your silence. It keeps you isolated, ashamed, and focused on self-improvement when the self was never the problem. You make $100,000 a year and you feel broke because $100,000 has been systematically devalued while the costs of living have been systematically inflated. That's not your fault. That's not your failure. That's the economy working exactly as it has been engineered to work. So which part of this picture feels closest to your life right now? Is it the paycheck that disappears before you've done anything optional? The healthcare costs that arrive without warning and leave without mercy? The housing that takes half your income and gives you nothing but a place to sleep? The grocery bills that climb every month for the same items in the same quantities? Whatever your version of this trap looks like, you reliving inside the same structure as millions of others who've been told they alone in their struggle. You're not alone. And naming what's happening, understanding it clearly, refusing to accept that personal failure explains systemic extraction. That's worth something. It's worth the clarity of seeing the world as it actually is, rather than as you were told it should be. It's worth the solidarity of knowing others share your experience. And it's worth the possibility, however distant, that clear sight and shared understanding might eventually create pressure for something better. If this breakdown helped you make sense of why your salary doesn't work the way it should, consider subscribing. We're building a space here for honest conversation about the economy people actually live in, not the one described in textbooks, not the one politicians promise. The real one, because navigating this economy is hard enough without doing it in the dark.